Let me go across to Mr. Greg Swenson. He is chairman of the Republicans Overseas UK. He's joining us live on the broadcast from Florida. Greg, good evening. Welcome to WION. I want to start by asking you, of course, you know, the Venezuelan strikes would have made the Republican Party and Donald Trump think that perhaps the approval ratings will see a hike. That clearly hasn't happened.
Yeah, and it probably will happen, and it all depends on the economy and affordability. That's the big issue. So, you know, while President Trump has had great successes with foreign policy and with this recent intervention in Venezuela as well as Iran last summer, you know, the American voter doesn't really care that much about foreign policy. So I think he's doing the right thing in looking after American interests and Western interests around the world. But I think he's got to change and refocus back on domestic issues and the economy. If he does that, his numbers will clearly go up. I don't have any problem with that. Remember, Ronald Reagan was polling at 35 in early January, or early 1983. And a year and a half later, he won 49 states in arguably the greatest landslide in American electoral history. So, you know, it's a little early, but I do agree that the president is not polling high enough right now to bring Republicans a big victory in the midterms, but that can change a lot. I mean, 9 months, 10 months in electoral politics is a long time.
Sure, this is a long time. And, you know, this is what I was coming to next, Greg. The fact that the president isn't significantly or largely talking about the affordability crisis, the Medicaid cut that has happened, and those are the issues that actually plague the voters. That's what they're concerned about, because, of course, we all know that a lot of MAGA voters do not support such military strikes out of the country. So why isn't the president talking about all of these issues?
Yeah, it's a great question, Shreya. You know, I think what the president did pivot right after the November elections of 2 months ago, when you saw, you know, some fairly, I wouldn't say significant, but comfortable wins by the Democrats. They were in blue states that they would have won anyway, but they won with bigger margins than was expected. And so I think right after those off-year elections in early November, you saw the president as well as the members of his cabinet, especially the Treasury Secretary, really pivot toward affordability and talking about the economy. But sometimes the real world gets in the way. And I think this whole issue with Venezuela was very timely and it was urgent. And so, you know, that in a perfect world, he could have stayed on point and just talked about domestic issues. And the news in the economy, by the way, is really positive. So I think this will, if he can get this, you know, foreign policy stuff behind him over the next few weeks and really pivot again back to the economy and affordability, it will favor him because the numbers are really positive. You don't hear that from the mainstream media here in the U.S., but the GDP growth was 4.3%. Inflation was well below 3% at 2.7. These are fantastic numbers, and you're starting to see a recovery in real earnings, in earnings adjusted for inflation. They were up significantly in Trump's first term. They were down in Biden's term, down 4%. And they're up 1.5% already in Trump's second term. So if that continues and we get real wages up, I think the Republicans will do much better in the midterms.
And so, Greg, my last question to you, and a quick one at that, because you were talking about how Ronald Reagan was an exception and he turned the tide and all. You know, in the past, we've seen in the 1930s as well, there was an exception of a ruling party winning the midterm elections. And obviously, the focus is now on the midterm elections coming up in November. No ruling party has ever won that except in the 1930s, the two examples that we have. But how do you see this happening for Republicans? Because the Democrats clearly have been upping the ante against Donald Trump as far as the Epstein files are concerned.
Well, without a doubt, I don't think the Epstein files will affect it at all. But I do totally agree with you that the party in power always loses seats in the midterms, and we don't have a lot of seats to lose as Republicans. So, you know, all historical metrics would suggest the Democrats win the House. However, as you pointed out, there are exceptions. It happened for George W. Bush in 2002 when the Republicans picked up seats. But, you know, you had the post 9/11 momentum for W. He was polling at 70% at the time. So you had a lot more unity in the country then. So, and then, of course, Bill Clinton picked up seats in the 98 midterms because of the backlash against his impeachment. So, so many things can happen. I would have to agree that I would favor the Democrats in terms of trying to predict this election just because almost all the time they win.
All right, we'll leave it there. Let's wait and watch what happens in the next few months and, of course, the big midterm elections in November. Greg Swenson, thank you very much for joining us on WION and sharing your perspective.
Thanks for having me.